What's up, y'all? TBrown31 here with JaboctheGreat once again. We're back with another episode of the Last Word podcast. And today we're going to be covering both of the NCAA tournaments, the men's and the women's. Been pretty crazy so far in both tournaments, but we're going to start with the men's in this one. This one has had probably the most upsets by far. I mean, it's been really crazy, especially the first round. A lot of top tier teams going down. No 1 and 2s falling though in the first round, or the second round for that matter. So nothing too crazy like we saw a few years back. Finally seeing a 1 lose to a 16, nothing like that, but pretty big teams falling in this first round. So Auburn, the 4 seed, they fall. BYU 6, they fall. St. Mary's falls. Wisconsin, they fall as a 5 seed as well. Texas Tech's a 6 seed. They lose to NC State. Biggest one is probably Kentucky losing to Oakland University. The Oakland Golden Grizzlies. Probably not a team that many people have heard of. They were a 14 seed. They end up beating Kentucky. And then South Carolina, the last one in the first round, they're a 6 seed. They lose to Oregon, the 11 seed. So all those top teams just in that first round, they all took the L there. I mean, this is what March Madness is all about. And I'll talk about this in just a second here, but only 1 6 seed was able to actually advance to the Sweet 16. Now, it's not like 6 is that high, but see that many, at least in that first third of teams, I guess, fall that early on. Pretty surprising there. And then, as I just mentioned, Clemson, they were able to move on. They upset Baylor, who was a 3 seed. So it was ridiculous. It seemed like every single day something was happening with an upset. I mean, every couple hours, I guess you can even say. Even some of these other games, between some of these top teams, like not all complete beatdowns. I mean, Kansas 4 over 13 Sanford, but only won by a few points there, and then they end up turning around. They lose to Gonzaga. So I mean, it definitely a pretty crazy start to the tournament. So which one of these games really stood out to you first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, following the tournament, one of the first things that's going to stick out to me is Jack Golke putting up 10 threes, only 10 threes,
Yeah.
by the way. He shot 20 threes, hit 10 of them. That was his whole shot compilation there against Kentucky, and Kentucky losing in that. And watching that game, I think Kentucky tried to play too much like Oakland at a certain point, right? Oakland's hitting the lights out from threes, maybe just Golke, actually. I think they only hit 30-something threes, or 20-something threes, and he had half of that. They attempted 30. And he attempted 20 on his own. So that should tell you what they were doing in that game. And Kentucky kept trying to answer, and they weren't hitting. But they were playing well from inside. Now, later in the game, I can't remember his name, but Reed something. He was hitting some threes for Kentucky, but I believe that the 3-point duel was not what Kentucky needed to get into. And that's how they found themselves into an upset. I can tell you that some of these upset in my bracket I had. I had faith in NC State this year. They were hot out of the ACC tournament. You win 5 games in 5 days. I think you're pretty poised for the bracket. So them beating Texas Tech wasn't super crazy to me. St. Mary's being a 5 seed I thought was fun, but then they got beat up by Grand Canyon, and that was not. I didn't expect that one. I mean, 75-66 isn't like a massive loss, but that wasn't one that I was expecting to see. I actually have a friend from undergrad who ended up going to Yale, and we talked about the Auburn-Yale game, and how he said he just couldn't pick. He goes to Yale, and he's like, I just can't pick Yale. And then, so, of course, we had to text after when they hit a game winner to beat Auburn, who I, before the tournament started, thought that Auburn, the 4 seed, was low. I was like, oh, they could be a 2 easily. Apparently not. Got caught slipping by the Ivy League school and sent home, and then Yale would end up going around to get smacked by San Diego State, team who was previously in the national championship. So some interesting results there for sure. Wisconsin, James Madison was a fun one. That was a little damaging to me. I took Wisconsin on a glory run to upset Duke. That didn't happen. They didn't go to the first round. As a Clemson student, though, I will say that one of the most fun things about this tournament was how much people thought that we would lose to New Mexico. And I get it. As a Clemson student, as a Clemson basketball fan, we play the worst basketball ever at the last few months of the season, or in March if we get that far. Last year we just missed the tournament. I thought we should have been in it. Then we get put in the extra like mini tournament, and we lose first round immediately by like 20. So you know, not a great basketball from Clemson in this time of the year. But I had faith. I had a lot of hope. And then, we're the only 6 seed to make it through. Every other 6 seed falls. And not only do we make it through, we beat New Mexico 77-56. For me personally, that's what I would like to see from my team as a 6 seed against the 11 seed. Also took Clemson against Baylor. I do have to say that was more of a hopeful pick of me just being a Clemson student and hoping to see my guys get it through. PJ Hall, been there for a while. Really good basketball player, just kind of goes under the radar because he plays at Clemson, and guaranteed one way or the other we will fall off at the end of each regular season. But we managed to hold on against Baylor. We did do the usual Clemson thing in the second half. We were up like 20, and then all of a sudden it was a 2-point game, and then we managed to pull away and kind of hold on to that win. But yeah, I don't know. First round was fun. As a Clemson student, I think that our run is probably over. Arizona is another favorable matchup. We'll talk a little bit about Sweet 16 matchups before we get to the end here. But this has been a pretty action-packed men's bracket, which is crazy to think about because it's very rare that all the 1s and 2s make it to the Sweet 16. And so to have that happen and still have a bunch of like excitement going on, I think is fun. But I think what happened here is that in the first round we had a whole lot of excitement, and then the round of 32 put a lot of that to bed, right? Dayton survived Nevada, so you get the classic 7-2 matchup, and then Arizona beats them up. Baylor comes through over Colgate in a pretty big win, and they fall to Clemson, and you got a big result there. Otherwise, though, Grand Canyon beats up St. Mary's, can't get past Alabama. Michigan State upsets Mississippi State, can't get anywhere close to getting past North Carolina. Duquesne gets past BYU in a pretty big game, can't get past Illinois. San Diego State and Yale both upset positions, so they have there's some fun stuff going on there for sure. San Diego State, though, puts it into Yale's Cinderella run. The higher seed goes through. Northwestern upsets FAU, then they get stopped by UConn. And the kind of the same thing goes on there. James Madison takes out Wisconsin. Duke puts it into that run. Texas A&M takes out Nebraska. Houston puts it into that run. So by the time you get to this round of Sweet 16, you kind of have just like all the high seeds except for, and I kind of destined because they were both from upsets. NC State takes out Texas Tech. Oakland takes out Kentucky. They have an overtime duel where I watched them play both simultaneously some of the best basketball I've watched and some of the worst basketball I've watched, as NC State smoked like 8 straight layups. But they make it overtime. They beat Oakland. Sorry, NC State did not beat NC State. They tried to with as many layups as they missed, but they beat Oakland, and so you get a guaranteed kind of you're going to have an 11 or a 14 in the Sweet 16 from that end of the bracket. So the biggest Cinderella thing we still have going on is that NC State makes it up against Marquette. Marquette struggled with Colorado, but came out on top. So I think that's going to be a fun one. I think Gonzaga takes out Kansas, but that's a 5-4. It kind of feels the same as the 8-9, right? Like, is that surprising? Is that crazy? And then Oregon, under the low seed, took out South Carolina. That was kind of shocking. Obviously, as a Clemson student, you would think I'd have like some sort of hatred for South Carolina, but it's much more complicated when you grow up in South Carolina. So I did pick South Carolina. Was hoping to see them move forward, but Jermaine Couisnard, who played for them last year, had some thoughts about that. Put it into that, and then Couisnard and one other player for Oregon were the only 2 players to really score at all for Oregon against Creighton. They put up like I think 60 of their 73 points, you're just not going to win a game going that direction. So men's bracket has been fun, and I do still think it's fun. But we had the round of 64 was a lot of fun. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of hectic stuff going on. Round of 32, the most of the higher seeds said, time to put that to bed. Even in the case of the Cinderella run, NC State is the higher seed than Oakland. They put that one to rest. And for the most part, the higher seeds all advance to the Sweet 16. And we're kind of getting into, rarely, or kind of a rare sight of just like 16 teams that are almost just the top 16 teams in the country when the bracket started. So I don't know what you feel about that. But I did think this was interesting to think about how exciting this tournament has been for the men so far. And yet we have all the 1s and 2s and a lot of 3s and, a 6 and an 11 in the Sweet 16. I think that's a very interesting kind of result.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much just eloquently summed it up there. Like first round, you had all these upsets, and then really once you get to the second round, it's like, all right, enough of that. For the most part, like you said, all the higher seeded teams, they won. Even with, like I said, Kansas, losing Gonzaga. I mean, 4 losing to a 5. Like, you can talk about the final score, I guess, but not that insane, especially since Kansas again almost lost to Stanford in the first round. So yeah, it seemed like things mostly corrected themselves. So outside of NC State, there obviously they'll be going up against number 2 Marquette. We'll see how that one turns out. Things mostly corrected. So it doesn't mean it's any less exciting. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest matchups, of course, is a national championship rematch from last year, UConn and San Diego State. Of course, UConn won a tournament last year against San Diego State. San Diego State was actually the same seed last year. UConn was, I think, 4 seed, so
Yeah.
a little bit different circumstances, but still, that'll be a national championship rematch. So we got some exciting matchups there. UNC and Alabama, probably definitely going to be a good one. Houston and Duke. So Purdue and Gonzaga. I mean, that's another good one there. So still a lot of exciting matchups. Just in spite of a lot of those Cinderella teams, I guess, not making it past the second round. Now, in terms of the women's tournament, that's really a completely different story. Uh, Top seeds this year, they pretty much, outside of Ohio State being the 2 seed, losing to Duke, 7 seed in the second round. Not too much really going on. The top seeds in women's basketball. I mean, this is, you mentioned it before we were recording. Last year had a little bit more upsets and everything, but generally in women's basketball, it's going to be those top seeds really just dominating, especially South Carolina off the top of my head. I mean, first round, Presbyterian 91-39, and then 88-41 over UNC. Like some of these other games were close, but I mean, Indiana and Fairfield pretty much a beatdown. Oregon State and Eastern Washington, I mean, that was a beatdown. Like Tennessee and Green Bay, like 92-63. Like Iowa and Holy Cross. Like, I mean, most of these top seeds, USC, Texas A&M, like it's just going to keep. You can go all the way down the list. I mean, these top seeds for the most part, they just killed these lower seeds in the first 2 rounds in the women's tournament. So you're not really too many upsets to go on. Ole Miss, they fall to Marquette. That's a 7-2. And then Middle Tennessee, they beat Louisville. And I know the whole storyline, Haley Van Lith being able to play Louisville. Now being that she's at LSU, that's not going to happen. No big deal there. I mean, again, it's just not too much really. I don't want to say not exciting, but as far as anything, as craziness, the March Madness, didn't really live up to its namesake for the most part there. But I think that's just kind of more par for the course with the women's rather than the men's. So I think for women's, it's more just, it's just a lot more likely we'll see these top teams face off against each other. And to me, I think that's more exciting to see these top teams in women's basketball rather than top teams in men's, because I feel like in general, the top teams in those top teams in women's that are just far and away better than everybody else, and there's a pretty steep drop off. So I just don't know. Maybe if a team made a Cinderella run and would have been able to compete in some of these later rounds, I doubt it. I just think it's a lot more interesting. Like personally, for me, as long as we get like a South Carolina, Iowa, or South Carolina, LSU matchup, LSU, Iowa at some point, USC, UCLA, like any Connecticut, like as long as I get to see some of those matchups, I'm perfectly fine. So no complaints there if there not being a lot of upsets.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference with this, and maybe it's just because of the way that the basketball's been working out so far recently. But because men can enter the draft so much earlier, right? Those teams are kind of like rotate. Like each year, you're gonna have programs that are gonna stay good, right? Like UNC is gonna be good every year because they're gonna keep getting guys. Armando Bigot's gonna play for 12 years. It's all gonna be good. For the women's bracket, though, I mean they have to stay a little longer. So you're gonna have teams kind of bundle up. You're going to have teams stay good for a little longer because you're going to have players that are more familiar with each other. There's not as much of like this random team just got some guys there. And because of that, as far as like media goes, I feel like, right, this year, as far as regular season goes, I watched a lot more women's basketball this year. There's been a lot more, I don't know, fun with the games, not because the men have been playing bad. I did the first few men's games I watched this year. I did think like this is horrible basketball, but they recovered. That just college basketball when it starts off is always going to be a little slow. But the women's bracket this year has had a lot of I think there's a lot more like star in the media stuff, right? Like South Carolina obviously has a completely reset roster for the most part, but you've got emerging stars there. You've got Caitlin Clark on the news every time you open it. You have Angel Reese stirring up stuff. Haley Van Lith goes to LSU. That adds a lot of story there. Paige Becker's at UConn. Cameron Brink at Stanford. Because they've been there so far, so long so far, you have a lot more media attention to these particular people on these particular teams. And I think what that does is it makes it to where no upsets is maybe more fun, right? Nobody, it's kind of, I mean, Angel Reese has a lot of haters, but I'm going to speak as somebody who doesn't hate Angel Reese. It would be maybe, I would say, less fun if LSU went out first round and I didn't get to see, the potential
Right.
for an LSU Caitlin Clark game or anything like that. So I do think that it's that because the women have to be there longer and they get more media attention and become these like more stars for these teams, right? That it's just more exciting for the top seeds to keep going. Also add some drama, right? LSU, big one. Haley Van Lith, Angel Reese, plenty of other big players. Flau'jae is there. They struggled with Rice in the first game, and then Kim Mulkey shared her thoughts about that after they won, and was like, that was a horrible performance. Middle Tennessee took out Louisville, so Louisville could not get Haley Van Lith could not get a rematch with her old team. And then Middle Tennessee, for a little bit, made it tough with LSU. They led at halftime. However, Kim Mulkey adjusted, and LSU ended up winning 83-56. So I don't think that was much of a problem for too long. But you have things like that make it fun too, right? Because everyone thinking, Angel Reese, these guys should be making it far, but they're having a fight. UCLA struggled a little bit with Creighton. I say a little bit; they won by 4, so they struggled with Creighton in the round of 32. I think it just makes the women's bracket a lot more. I don't know, because of the star power. I think it makes it more fun. There's been a lot going on. Surprisingly, we had a thriller with Iowa State and Stanford. Iowa State rookie Audie Crooks is like 6'3", just a unit. Bullied Maryland that whole game. Stanford has Cameron Brink, defensive player of the year candidate every time for the college awards. They had a big battle. That game was crazy. They went to overtime. Cameron Brink and Audie Crooks both fouled out. And that just, there's a lot of stuff to go on there because there's so much star power going on. That doesn't mean the men's games are boring. By the way, on this long-winded tangent, I do want to say that I've had a lot of fun watching both brackets this year. The men's tournament has had a lot of stuff. There were 2 back-to-back overtime thrillers in one night with NC State followed by Creighton and Oregon. Just massive fun in this tournament so far this year. But yeah, I think that obviously we go to March Madness looking for the madness, and we're hoping to see people get upset. But I think with the women's bracket, maybe it's just a little different. I think there's a lot of star power going on. People want to see Dawn Staley and hear her talk about the tournament as the game goes on. They want to see Caitlin Clark do well. People want to see Paige Beckers do well. I do like UConn women's basketball, so I would like to see Paige Beckers do well. But yeah, I think people are just interested to see these big seeds move on. We have a lot of potential for some pretty good ones, right? If Iowa can get past Colorado, then they've likely got a shot at LSU. If LSU can get over UCLA, that would actually be an upset. UCLA is the 2nd seed, so that's a big matchup right there. South Carolina, Notre Dame would be huge. They had some big matchups this season. South Carolina obviously won them. They were undefeated this year, so they've been putting the college world on notice. And just to get to the championship, right, you'd have to have some pretty big stuff go on between certain teams. You would have to see Iowa and South Carolina go up against each other. Then you got Stanford, who will probably end up facing against or they're about to face against NC State, and you could see them end up going against Texas or Gonzaga. Texas led by some star rookies. They got to be a 1 seed. They're going to probably go far. USC and Juju Watkins, another rookie, is going far. They could end up matching up against Duke or UConn. Just a lot going on that I think that, not to be a hater to any of these lower seed teams, but had Middle Tennessee made the Cinderella run, I don't think it would get the attention that a men's Cinderella bracket would, where people are like, yeah, let's go to the underdog. I think people would just be upset that they took Angel Reese out of the tournament and would probably be maybe rooting on their downfall. So yeah, both tournaments have been fun so far. The Sweet 16 is poised to be pretty big. UConn again going to go up against Duke. LSU and UCLA is probably the biggest game there. South Carolina, Indiana will be great because I think South Carolina will finally get a challenge. I don't think they're going to lose, but I do think that we may get a team that can fight back a little bit. And then Oregon State and Notre Dame should be fun. Again, all the high seeds move through. So at this point in the Sweet 16, all these games so far, the women's bracket, or at least in the round of 32, there's a lot of pretty good games. I think moving into the Sweet 16, you're going to really get into the competitive games, and you can see teams like South Carolina, like Iowa, who I wavered a little bit against West Virginia, like USC, like UConn, actually maybe have a little bit more of a challenge as they try to get to the Elite Eight.